in for the oldie.
Well, you will.
I'm just saying, I'm here and available if anybody wants me. This is rather a nightmare following these two speeches, as you can imagine, because Prue has obviously talked amazingly about not only her life, but her wonderful novels, and they are terrific reads, but also left us with the sense of there was potentially a sex advice column coming in Cosmopolitan quite soon. And then obviously Jonathan is now told, you know, ruined everybody's reputation by saying basically we're all pissed most of the time. So I'm not sure whether I should just fall over at this point and leave the room, I think. But I'm going to therefore just talk a tiny bit. I do think, incidentally, that the world is missing something from you, Jonathan, if you're not going to write novels or plays. I do feel that there is certainly a play in you, if you don't mind me suggesting that. So I'm just going to ramble on for about 8 minutes about why I make stuff up. Because in the end, when you're a novelist or a playwright, that's what you're doing. And it is absolutely right what Jonathan says about being inspired by other people. And for me, all of the stories come from place, exactly as you say. Sadly, not growing up in Soho, Sussex was not awfully racy in the 1960s, and truthfully is not awfully racy now. But for me, it was that thing of growing up in Chichester in the 60s and 70s, and having that thing that I think many children have, if you're lucky, which is that there was the ritual of the bedtime story. And my wonderful dad, who died in 2011, was dispatched always to read to me, because I was the eldest, and I had 2 younger sisters who required baths and talcum powder and all of that, you know, ghastly stuff. So my mum did that, and I had every night when I was 4 and 5 and 6, my dad to myself reading me a story. And in those days, there wasn't this whole extraordinary idea of children's literature, about books that every child would read, the fact that the bestseller charts are full of writing for children. Fantastic now. But in those days, really, there was Blyton, of course, there was C.S. Lewis, of course, there were some. But my dad was given no instructions at all, so he read me the stories that he had loved as a boy. And when I say that he died in 2011 and he was 86 then, you can imagine the stories they were. So at the age of 5, for my bedtime story, my father felt the right story to read might be Rider Haggard's She, which, as you all know, this goes right back to Prue, of course, is basically sex and violence from start to finish. And the good thing, of course, when you're 5 is that you don't really understand what some of that means when there are descriptions of, well, you know, stuff. But you do understand that it's very exciting when people's heads are chopped off by rocks that fall down, or that everybody is massacred, about 55,000 people massacred in one moment. And so after that, my dad read me She, and then I said, this is good, can I have something else? And then, of course, he read me King Solomon's Mines, which has remained my favourite adventure story of all time. And then when I was older, I discovered with King Solomon's Mines that there was a wonderful story behind the story. And many of you will know this, but that Rider Haggard was on a train with his brother, and his brother bet him, you know, it was just a kid's bet with a couple of pennies, that he couldn't write as an exciting adventure story as Treasure Island. And so Rider Haggard accepted the bet, and he said, absolutely, I will. And he wrote King Solomon's Mines in 6 weeks. And when it was published, 1896, the advertising, and I think Prue, Jonathan and I will all feel that our publishers have let us down very severely here, the advertising campaign simply said, the best book ever written. And it was all over every billboard in Victoria Station and Waterloo and all of these things. And so it set up in me this great desire, not, I'm afraid, like Prue does so brilliantly, to write love stories. It set up in me the desire to write adventure stories. And what I think I had at the back of my mind was, there were great writers of romance, particularly the great women writers of romance, but both, absolutely both. But I was never going to be Jane Austen. And I was interested in all the other things that might happen in a woman's life that wasn't about falling in love and finding your Darcy. And so when I was writing the first of my big novels, and I mean big in terms of doorstop novels, Labyrinth, I was talking to my dad about it. And I said, you know, it's about 13th century France, it's about a group of heretical Christians called the Cathars, it's a novel about war and violence, really. War and faith, the consequences of faith, the consequences of war. But you know, really, Daddy, it's exactly what you used to read to me. It's an old-fashioned adventure story, but with a twist. In this, the girls get to have the swords, and the girls are the heroes. And he looked at me and he said, "Darling, I have waited all of my life for a girl on a horse with a sword to come and rescue me." And I thought, if my dad likes the idea of these books, that we're onto something. So out of that, it's just that sense for me as a novelist, that you go somewhere. It could be anywhere. For me, it is Sussex, where I'm born and bred, and we'll go back to in a moment, and Carcassonne, which is my adopted home in the southwest of France. And I found myself there entirely by accident, but fell in love there. And there I was able to be not the person I am at home in Chichester. Because in Chichester, because I was born there and went to school there, and then moved back there with my family and live there now, I was always somebody's daughter and sister and pupil and friend and later employer and then later mum and wife. And writer was about number 12 on that list of what you could call yourself. But when I got to Carcassonne, I was just a writer. Nobody knew me at all. So I had to go away from home in order to learn how to be a writer, writing about home. But when I started to write the big French stories, it was exactly that sense, that when you go to Carcassonne, when you go to the mountains of the Pyrenees, when you go down to Tarascon on the border with Andorra, and you know about the history. One person once put it that it is a green land soaked red, because it is a place where the wars of religion were played out. And these are the stories that appealed to me. And when I got down there, it was a case of climbing up to the top of that mountain and thinking, if you stand still just long enough and listen, all of the stories you can hear that you might tell. And that sense of walking along a path in the Pyrenees or the very ancient woodlands of Rennes-les-Bains, Rennes-le-Château, and just imagining that if you could turn round just a tiny bit faster than it's possible to do, you might just see somewhere a shadow on the path behind you. So I'm going to do the same trick as Prue did, and I think it's exactly the right way to do it, which is, my new books are not yet out, so you can't have them. I have just written a play which is based on a ladies' entertainment troupe. They're all in their 70s and 80s, and it is absolutely about the joy of older life. But the thing that I'm talking about in September, which is the new book, Taxidermist's Daughter, and I'm not going to talk about it much now because this is a hot room and it's an after-lunch speech. And Buxton is beautiful and we should all be out having our constitutionals in a proper Jane Austen way, I feel. But the Taxidermist's Daughter is really important to me because it is an old-fashioned Gothic thriller. It is in the tradition of Gothic writing, Frankenstein, Daphne du Maurier's The Birds, Jekyll and Hyde, where there is essentially an idea that you are stuck between a rock and a hard place. So if you run that way, the mad lunatic with the axe will get you. And if you go this way, the ice flow or the forest or the flood will get you. But the reason it matters to me is that it's set at home. It's set at home, the village I grew up in, Fishbourne, outside of Chichester. And it's taken all of these years as a professional writer to think I could go home and write about that. And I wrote the book last year, and at that stage my dad had died, and my mum sadly died just before Christmas. But when we launched the book, and it was set in the village that we'd grown up, like Prue, a very happy childhood, a very happy life with wonderful parents who gave us all everything we needed, which was the sense that being happy and being fulfilled and living with a group of people who were there for you is actually the only thing that matters, because from that springboard you can do anything. And I wrote the story and we did a big event in the Festival Theatre, and it was the last moment that my wonderful mum had the chance to do this. So I started talking and said, the Taxidermist's Daughter, set in 1912, it's the wettest summer in Sussex on record, there is some ghastly secret 10 years in the past, it is about an old museum of taxidermy that has fallen into wreck and ruin, there is somebody now murdering people in the village. It is a very beautiful village, but you know in the same way that the tide goes down and the tide comes up, that under the surface of this perfect village, something terrible has happened. At which point my mum said, "It's not based on her childhood, you know, I just want to say this." So the entire way through my very dramatic presentation of the Gothic novel, my mum heckled from the audience from start to finish. So whatever I said, she argued with me. And she said, well, there was a taxidermy museum, but of course nothing ever happened there. And I kept having to backpedal all the way through. And of course it was that sort of thing that at the end, and people came up, and it is set there, and every novel that you do is a sort of palimpsest of the places you've been. So on the one hand, I was remembering walking on the Fishbourne Marshes as a child. The second hand, I was walking there now with my dog as a grown-up and my grown-up children. And behind that is the imagined place of 1912 as the floodwaters are rising. But at the same time, you always come from where you come from. And so afterwards, when people came up to get their books signed, people would say, you know that house? And I said, yes. You know the house you've put, you know, the house where all the stuff happened? And I said, yes. He said, you put that in my field. And I said, I'm so sorry, sir, about putting it in your field. He said, no, I love it. I'm going to actually see if we can do tours around the house. He said, have you read the book? No, he hadn't read the book. I said, when you've read the book, you will understand you don't want to offer people tours around your house. So I'm going to stop there, just to say that for all of us as writers, exactly as Jonathan said, the joy is going out and about. Because we do sit in our rooms, and most of us like a bit of a chat from time to time, and we are very grateful to be invited to places like this. And it's a great honour, I think, for all of us to be at the end of what has clearly been an exceptional festival, and to be this sort of, I'm going to say we were bringing up the literary rear, but given what Prue said, I don't think I should say that. So it just remains for me to say it's been a great pleasure to come to Buxton, with all, I'm sure, I would certainly love to come back. It's clearly a place, much like my beloved Chichester, where all of you who live here and all of you who have come in to make the programme make it one of those very special places. And so I do hope you have your own novelist lurking about the place, about to make rather ghastly things happen in the new baths when they reopen. Thank you very much.